There's a negotiation happening right now that almost nobody in Washington wants to talk about publicly. And no, it is not about uranium enrichment, ballistic missile ranges, or Iran's underground centrifuge sites. The real question being asked in secret is much bigger. And if it is true, it changes everything. Because what is being discussed right now is not how this war ends, but whether America is preparing to leave the Middle East for good. That possibility sounds impossible, until you hear what Iran is demanding behind the scenes. Those earlier negotiations effectively ended on February 28th, when the first bombs fell on Iran. Since then, the conversation has shifted quietly into back channels, intermediaries, and Gulf capitals. And what is being discussed now is far more consequential than any nuclear deal ever was. It is a conversation about whether the United States military is going to leave the Middle East, not temporarily, but permanently. That is the condition Iran has reportedly put on the table for any ceasefire. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, has stated clearly and without ambiguity that the United States must withdraw its military bases from the region. Not one base, not a symbolic reduction. All of them. The bases in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. The entire military infrastructure America has spent 70 years building. The forward deployment posture that underpins Washington's security guarantee to Gulf partners for 3 generations. Iran wants all of it gone. And here is the development that makes this even more shocking. In the last 48 hours, reports suggest American officials are actually discussing it, quietly, carefully, and through multiple channels. Because once you understand why these talks are happening, the rest of this war starts to look very different. According to those reports, 2 parallel conversations are underway. The first involves a temporary withdrawal. American forces leave on a defined timeline, months, not years, giving Washington political cover to describe it as a strategic repositioning instead of a retreat. The second conversation is more serious, a permanent exit with a formal deadline, a timeline, and a third-party guarantor, reportedly Russia, ensuring Iran accepts a ceasefire in exchange. Think about what that means. A full American military departure from the Middle East negotiated under fire after just 13 days of a war that was supposed to last 4 to 6 weeks and end in regime change in Iran. So how did this happen? Why would a U.S. administration that launched its most ambitious military operation since 2003 now be discussing the terms of its own exit? To understand that, you have to understand what happened to American military capacity in just 13 days of combat. Because the issue now is not only what Iran has done, the real issue is what the Pentagon may no longer be able to sustain. On the morning of February 28th, the United States entered this war with a set of assumptions. It assumed Iran's military would be rapidly degraded by overwhelming American air power. It assumed Iran's population would rise against the government after Khamenei's death. It assumed the Strait of Hormuz would remain open, because no rational adversary would both fight the U.S. military and blockade global oil supply at the same time. And it assumed America's missile defense systems, Patriot batteries, THAAD interceptors, shipborne SM-3s and SM-66 would protect American forces and allied capitals well enough to keep this war one-sided. Every one of those assumptions has now been stress-tested. Most of them have failed. But the one causing the most urgent alarm behind closed doors is not the politics, not even the oil price, it is the interceptor crisis. In the first 5 days of Operation Epic Fury, the United States reportedly fired more than 800 Patriot anti-ballistic missile interceptors. 800 in 5 days. Defense analysts say that number exceeds the total number of Patriot interceptors fired during the entire 3-year Russia-Ukraine war combined. And each PASI-3 MSE interceptor, the most capable version used against Iran's advanced ballistic missiles, costs around $3.9 million per shot. That means in just 5 days, America may have spent roughly $2.4 to $3 billion purely on defense, not on airstrikes, not on offensive operations, on shooting down the missiles coming the other way. And here is where the problem becomes much bigger than money. The factories that build these interceptors cannot replace them fast enough. At Lockheed Martin's current production rate, replacing what was consumed in those first 5 days would take roughly 15.5 months. The Pentagon has already signed contracts to increase Patriot production to 2,000 per year, but the target will not be reached for years. The stockpiles exist now. The problem is that at this burn rate, they may not exist for much longer if this war continues. When U.S. Army and Air Force vice chiefs testified before the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee this week, they were asked directly about the status of munitions stockpiles. The answer was not reassuring. General Christopher Leneve said the military does not currently have a good estimate of what is being burned. Think about that for a second. The most powerful military in history, fighting a war launched just 13 days earlier, may not have a reliable real-time count of how many of its most critical defensive missiles remain. Iran's parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, said this week that Iran would continue delivering blows until the United States was, in his words, driven to beg for a ceasefire. Looking at the interceptor math, that claim no longer sounds like empty rhetoric. Iran's foreign minister also posted words that no American official has publicly answered. He wrote, "Plan A for a clean, rapid military victory has failed. Your Plan B will be an even bigger failure, and that may be the most uncomfortable part of this entire story, because Plan A really was built around rapid collapse. It was the intelligence blueprint that assumed the killing of Khamenei would trigger political breakdown inside Iran, that the population would rise, that the military would fracture, that the IRGC would lose cohesion, and that a new government would emerge within weeks, ready to negotiate on Western terms. But 13 days later, Mojtaba Khamenei has become supreme leader. The IRGC has pledged total loyalty to him. Iran has struck targets across 9 countries. And the interceptor stockpile America needs to defend its own bases is burning at a rate that cannot be sustained. This is where the war stops being only military and becomes economic, structural, and strategic. The asymmetry driving these quiet exit conversations in Washington is not conventional battlefield superiority. It is the brutal math of cost and endurance. The United States spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars building the most advanced missile defense architecture in history. Patriot batteries in Bahrain and Qatar, THAAD systems pulled from South Korea and rushed to Jordan and Israel, shipborne SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors spread across destroyers and carrier groups, all of it designed to stop exactly the kind of ballistic missiles and drones Iran manufactures, and all of it now consuming stockpiles at rates never modeled for a prolonged conflict of this scale. Meanwhile, an Iranian Shahab-class missile can cost only several $100,000 to produce. The PASI-3 MSE interceptor used to destroy it costs around $3.9 million. The ratio is at least 10 to 1. Iran fires one missile. America spends millions. Iran fires a swarm of drones. America must either use million-dollar interceptors or absorb the hit. There are not enough cheap short-range air defense systems to stop everything economically. So the expensive interceptors are being used, the stockpiles are shrinking, and the war is turning into a contest of who can bleed the other side's system faster. This is not random speculation. These are the calculations Pentagon analysts reportedly showed the administration before the war began. They warned that this kind of conflict could leave America dangerously exposed. Those warnings were brushed aside. The war started anyway. And now the math is unfolding in real time exactly as predicted. That is why conversations that sounded unthinkable on February 27th are suddenly being discussed behind closed doors. The Gulf states are drawing their own conclusions too. Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE all reportedly asked the United States not to launch this war from their territory. They refused to join the offensive campaign. Yet now they are absorbing Iranian strikes on their energy facilities, ports, desalination plants, and civilian infrastructure. Not because they chose this war, but because hosting American bases made them targets. And that changes how long they are willing to tolerate this arrangement. Their patience is not unlimited, and their strategic calculations are already shifting. Saudi analyst Faisal Abbas warned this week that what is happening in the Gulf will not stay in the Gulf. The food crisis, the energy crisis, and the regional destabilization will spread globally. And when the shooting stops, whenever it stops, Gulf capitals will look at the battlefield and ask one uncomfortable question: who actually protected us? They will see an America that promised to secure shipping but could not escort a single tanker safely through Hormuz. They will see a superpower that promised overwhelming military superiority, but is already worried about interceptor depletion after just 13 days. They will remember that this war was launched from their territory without their full consent. And on the other side, they will see China. Chinese vessels are among the few moving through the strait with any regularity. China's diplomatic envoy arrived quickly after the war began, and Chinese firms are not appearing on any Iranian target list. No Gulf government will announce a pivot to China while American bombs are still falling on Iran. But the strategic math underneath those alliances is already being recalculated in real time. And if America really does leave the Middle East, even partially, the consequences do not stop there. They ripple outward immediately. Because America's credibility is not divisible by geography. Taiwan will watch, Japan will watch, South Korea will watch. Every ally whose security depends on the credibility of an American guarantee will watch what happens next. Because if the United States negotiates the withdrawal of its Middle East bases under fire from a country it attacked less than 2 weeks earlier, every ally will ask the same question. If it happened there, what does that mean for us? Now imagine the day America formally announces it is withdrawing from the Middle East, not the day after. Not a year later, the day of the announcement. Oil markets go into shock, not only because of supply disruption, much of that is already priced in, but because the security architecture that guaranteed Gulf energy exports since the 1970s would have just been formally dissolved. Every long-term oil contract between Gulf producers and buyers in Asia, Europe, and America was built on one assumption: that the U.S. Fifth Fleet would stay in Bahrain, that the U.S. Air Force would operate from Al Udeid, that American military power would remain the final backstop keeping Hormuz open. The day that assumption becomes officially false, the pricing of every barrel moving through Hormuz has to be reconsidered. Every shipping rate changes, every insurance model changes, every energy futures position changes, and then Asia starts recalculating too. Taiwan's survival depends on the belief that Washington would bear enormous cost to defend it from Chinese pressure. That belief is not just military, it is psychological. It rests on credibility. If Washington is seen negotiating a military exit under Iranian fire, Beijing will run its own numbers. The lesson will not be that America is weak. The lesson will be that America has a limit, a visible threshold for acceptable cost. And that threshold may be lower than everyone previously thought. Japan sees that. South Korea sees that. NATO's eastern flank sees that. Britain sees it too. Its RAF base in Cyprus was reportedly struck by a Hezbollah-linked drone this week, a remarkable breach in a NATO-era conflict. France has moved warships into the eastern Mediterranean, but Europe's role in this war remains limited and defensive. If America exits, Europe is not in a position to replace it. That means the vacuum will not stay empty for long. And then there is Iran itself. What does Iran look like the day after an American withdrawal? Iran's foreign minister has already made one demand explicit: lift all sanctions as part of any settlement. After enduring the most intensive American bombing campaign since 2003 and still forcing Washington to discuss exit terms, Iran would emerge with enormous credibility at home and across the region. In Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and Gaza, that outcome would be read as proof that resistance worked. And once that perception hardens, conventional diplomatic pressure will struggle to contain it. Yemen is watching this closely. The Houthis have already signaled they have their hand on the trigger. They have so far held back from full entry, partly because of prior Israeli strikes on their leadership. But if Iran concludes that opening a third front would accelerate American withdrawal, the calculation changes fast. And if Yemen fully enters, then the second choke point comes into play: Bab el-Mandeb, the Red Sea route, the passage carrying major maritime traffic and the submarine cables linking Europe, Asia, and Africa. If both Hormuz and Bab el-Mandeb come under simultaneous pressure, the global supply chain is not merely disrupted, it starts to break. Iran has warned it is prepared to sustain this conflict for as long as necessary. Iranian officials have said oil could rise to $200 a barrel if strikes on Gulf energy infrastructure continue, and they have shown they can reach key targets: Saudi Aramco facilities, the Bapco refinery in Bahrain, Ras Tanura. The capability is there, the intent has been signaled. And at $200 oil, the damage is no longer measured in billions. It is measured in failed governments, collapsing industries, and the reversal of decades of development across the emerging world. Trump promised a short-term excursion. His advisors promised regime change in weeks, but America's interceptor stockpiles are burning at a rate that cannot be sustained. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. A Thai ship burned in the strait yesterday, and 3 sailors are still missing. And somewhere inside Gulf back channels, the real conversation is already happening. What is America willing to give up to end this war? That is now the central question, not whether America's position in the Middle East has been weakened. That answer already looks clear. The real question is what comes next. Is this a managed withdrawal, or is it the beginning of a collapse? And once the American flag comes down from those bases, will anyone still believe the difference matters? That is the conversation happening right now in the rooms cameras never see and podiums never mention. And whatever answer comes out of those rooms will not only decide how this war ends, it may define the next 50 years of global power, energy, and security. Subscribe to Market Mindset right now for the latest war-related updates, sharp market insights, and powerful analysis you won't get anywhere else. If this video helped you, hit like, share your thoughts in the comments, and share it with others who want to stay ahead of what's really happening in the world and the market.